Hello and welcome to the definitive tier list of DDDs. Here I'll be ranking every single boss you've ever had and their employees. All the categories are the same as before, except the last one we're going to be using to determine every single employee who needs to be fired for their utter incompetence. So let's get started with the first one, the level 1 DD Necro Slime. One thing you'll learn really quick is that the slimes often tend to be the best cards in the deck, as he allows you to fusion summon from your graveyard essentially as necrofusion, as the name would suggest. He's quite good and a staple in most lists, as fusions are often your go-to starters for any combo, and he's easily accessible through many means. So you definitely run this as many copies as you can get your hands on. Then we get to the best tuner in the entire deck, DD Lamia. Lamia is a level 1 who can summon herself out from hand and grave by simply sending one of your dark contracts you control to the graveyard, which you'll usually have an ample supply of after you're done using them. She allows you to climb into more incremental synchros such as Curse King Siegfried, one of the pinnacles of the deck, and her being able to summon herself from different areas gives her an era of flexibility that a lot of tuners just don't have. For that, she ends up being one of the 4 best cards in this deck, and will easily go into staple status. Then we have DD Ghost. It's one of the more interesting inclusions, as DD Ghost is a level 2 tuner, which as a level is very awkward for this deck, but has some very nice applications like getting extra resources in the graveyard, and upon being banished, it can recycle one of your other banished resources. Usually don't want to run this too much, but having a couple of copies is never a bad option. So it probably would definitely go into okay, not upset to have. Then you have the key combo starter for literally any single DDD combo ever, and you want this guy in your hand no matter what, and that being Swirl Slime. Swirl Slime can essentially just fusion summon from your hand using him and any other DD monster in your hand as well. And if that wasn't good enough, he can even banish himself from the graveyard the same turn to special summon any DD monster from your hand, even the big boys. He's further combo extender, gets at your bosses. What is not to love? I'm putting him busted. He might not, but he's pretty fucking close. Then we have DD Night Howling. DD Night Howling is interesting. It is a level 3 tuner that can summon pretty much any of your DD monsters from the graveyard, usually used for any good synchro play. The trick is that it eats your normal summon, which isn't too bad, but in comparison to some of the other more flexible options, it's only okay. Its level lends itself into going into the synchro 10s, so you can definitely run a copy or two if you like him. Next up is DD Lamia. DD Lamia is not amazing, but she serves a very nice purpose of being able to recycle DD monsters in your extra deck and being able to recycle monsters from your graveyard back to your hand, which is actually not terribly useful, as some cards are just stuck in your graveyard without her, and that makes her a really nice tech choice that I personally use in my own decks. Next we have DD Baphomet. Baphomet is one of the Xyz enablers of this deck. He can change any DD monster's level other than himself to a level from 1 through 8. Notable numbers you want to bring him to is 4, 6, and 8. He's a really good option if you want to go into your more harder to access Xyz monsters or any other more dedicated Xyz focused list of DDDs. So I'm definitely going to put him in okay, not upset to have. He's a great Xyz enabler. Probably ahead of Ghost. And then we have the very first, most depressing card on this list, DD Pandora. Pandora is fucking terrible. I don't know what to fucking tell you. A level 5 who has a draw 2 effect only when she's destroyed and you control no other cards. Disgusting. Just no, don't, no. You're fired. Get out of here. Next we have DD Vice Typhoon, which is a very interesting card as it's kind of comparable to Swirl Slime and Necro Slime in the fact that she can fuse from the graveyard, except the fact that it has to be the turn that she's sent And on top of that, she has an effect when she's normal summoned to tribute another DD monster special one from deck. Here's the big problem. She's level 7. We only have one good way to normal summon this thing, and you don't want to be doing it on Vice fucking Typhoon. On top of that, level 7 is often proved to be a very awkward level for DD monsters, as we have no rank 7s and is only good for going into Synchro 10s with Night Howling. So she's trash until we get like a decent way to summon her a lot more readily, and once there's more rank 7s in this deck, maybe she can see a little bit more use, but until then, she's gone. She's out of the company. She's fired. Then we have Supreme Kaiser. Kaiser is an artifact of what this deck is supposed to be as a pendulum deck. His effects solely rely on him getting penned out and him getting multiple attacks because of it. When he's penned out, he gets a blanket to get on the field, and you can pop Dark Contracts to get extra attacks. That's fine and all, but this deck honestly doesn't pen out all that much, and when they do, it's usually for lower scales like 0 to 5, so he's usually not included in this. On top of that, popping your Dark Contracts just to get some extra attacks is generally just not good enough. And the cherry on top is that he's level 7, so his level is not even that good. I'll say he's fired. He definitely is fired, but he's the least bad of them so far. Then we get to another card who's still bad. DDD Pendragon. Pendragon is honestly hardly even considered a DD card, as it has dragon support to it and has a very mediocre spell and trap pop effect. He's a pain to summon, and he's not worth the effort, and he's once again level 7. He's terrible, he's fired. Probably under Kaiser. Important thing to note is this deck has no dragons, so I don't even know why it has an association with dragons. Maybe it has something to do with Odd Eyes, I'm not entirely sure. Then we have very Arc 5-S cards, where the DD Arc and DD Evil are entirely designed to counter other pendulum strategies, and they don't even do it that well, and in real life we got them so far late into Master Rule 5 that it literally does not matter that they're out even right now. Arc is definitely better than DD Evil, as it easily extends itself off your opponent's cards, and Evil is just a beater. He does a few negaty things, and it's not great, but I guess there's some negaty things, so they're almost tech choices, but no, just you have better things that are worth more of your time. They'll definitely go. They're definitely not unusable, so they can go more on the top of this list. Though I like Kaiser a bit more, just because he's a good OTK beat strategy. DD Cerberus is one of the classic monsters of Reiji Akiba in the anime, but he's often not used so much nowadays because he's not very good. His pen effect allows him to turn any of your DDs to level 4. This is alright. His actual monster effect requires him to get penned out with another DD monster and have a continuous spell in graveyard. All of these conditions have to be met before you can even start to use that effect. It's almost a pain in the ass, and you don't have space to be running bad cards like this. Get him out of here. Now we're finally done dealing with so many bad cards in a row. We have one of the newest inclusions of the deck, and the card that's going to break this fucking deck wide open is DD Griffin. DD Griffin has 3 different effects, all of which are pretty good. He can special summon himself out. When he's penned out, he can draw and discard a card. And when he's summoned back from graveyard, which this deck does a lot, by the way, he can search any DD card. And you have no shortage of ways to get him into the graveyard. He's going to do a lot of work for this deck. He's going to put in so much work. Then we have the very oh so adorable DD Dog. DD Dog is kind of comparable to DD Arc and DD Evil as their anti-support to a summoning method, but him, on the other hand, is for fusions, synchros, and exceeds. By covering 3 different very generic summoning methods is going to make him a lot more usable than Arc and Evil. Both effects just have to do with making them not able to attack and negating, but he's not unusable. He's very playable, but he's not very good, so he can stay at the bottom of tech choice. Run him if you think he's adorable. He is. Next up is Orthros. Orthros is fascinating. It's the only level 4 tuner this deck has, which has very unique applications specifically for Flame King Genghis and getting into some Synchro 10s. And he has a okay MST-like effect on his pen scale. He can even be freely special summoned upon taking any damage, which does lock you into Fiends, which that's not even a problem for this deck, so he's a free extender. He has nothing going wrong with him. You run him if you like him. He's very, very good. If anything, you know, I think he can bump himself up to okay, not upset to have. He's not bad. Back to more depressing cards, though. DD Chevalier and DD Ogre. DD Chevalier and DD Ogre have problems that a lot of other DD cards don't suffer from, is that they want to be tribute summoned to get their effects. One adds from extra deck to hand, and the other specials from your extra deck, any dark pendulum monster. But the problem is this deck has no room to be tribute summoning anything, much less very not great beat sticks with pen effects that just drop and raise attack. An important note to add is that their pendulum skills are terrible for 6 and 8. Primarily designed to be specialing something out the pen 7s. Decent if you're going for Kaiser, but nothing else. Compared to Arc and Evil, with scales of 1 and 8 respectively, or Dog and Orthros, which have a scale 3, scale 6 and scale 8 are simply not going to cut it, especially for the higher levels of this deck. Chevalier even shares a pen scale with Cerberus, so they can sit right next to each other with their bad pen scales. Cerberus gets to go higher because its pen effect is not shit. Share. Ogre's not. Ogre is marginally better for having a better scale, but not by a whole lot. We'll move Vice Typhoon up. Finally break into the actual DDD monsters, the big boys of this deck. A lot of times these are not often just boss monsters, but effective extenders that have specific purposes depending on how you want to run this deck. This deck has many variants you can play. As our first DDD monster, we have Chaos King Apocalypse. Chaos King Apocalypse has 2 specific effects to special summon out when it's a pen scale and when it's in the graveyard by destroying or banishing resources from your graveyard or field. So he actually makes us a very decent extender, and with a skill 4, he's decent at summoning at higher levels of DDD monsters and extending off of them from that. But he has that awkward caveat as he's also level 7, so he's not great for his level. I will definitely put him in okay, not upset to have. He's a common to run as 1 or 2 of, sometimes 3 if you really like him. Not me personally. Then we have another card that will be coming out real soon, Eulogy King Vice. Eulogy King Vice Requiem is one of the newer cards to be added to this deck real soon. He's essentially an upgrade on Chaos King Apocalypse. He can special summon himself from his pen scale by popping 1 card in his field as opposed to banishing 2 monsters in the graveyard. But in doing so, in that special summon, he can increase or reduce his level so he can fix his problem of being level 7 and turn himself into a level 8. On top of that, if he's used for pretty much anything Xyz, Synchro, Link, Fusion, he gives that monster a very nice, decent effect to shuffle back Dark Contracts from the grave and field to pop cards and gain health back, which is not a very bad thing to have, as you can easily work him into most DD combos. So He's definitely not a check tech choice. I'm not even sure if he's okay as a to have. I'm probably gonna put him as a staple card because most decks will want to run him after his release. Then we have one of the cards I wish I could like a lot more in Rebel King Leonidas. His whole thing is that he is sort of anti-effect damage. His pen scale allows him to essentially ignore effect damage. On top of that, if you take effect damage, he can freely special summon him out from hand and give you the health back that you lost. And as a cherry on top, he makes you immune to all other effect damage, which is not even that bad against certain tech matchups and is always summonable through your basic combos. His biggest problem is that he's level 7. And being level 7 makes him really awkward to use in most combos. I want to like him a lot more, but until we have a rank 7, he's not going to be that good. But he's just waiting for his day. Right now, he's a great tech choice against burn decks, or as a reasonable extender if you just want some more beaters or field presence. Next, we have Super Side Zero King Maxwell. Zero King Maxwell is the definition of a monster that pierces. His pen effect drops a monster's defense to 0 and gives one of your dudes piercing, and his main effect is to do exactly that, drop your opponent's defense position monster's defense to 0 and then pierce. With a big 2000 body, he can really lay on damage. But that's kind of where it ends. Scale 4 makes him not that bad for higher level pendulum summons, but his only purpose is to serve as a beat stick. I'll definitely say run him if you like him. He's a very playable beat stick tool. He can probably go right about here. And then we get to one of the single best cards of the entire deck, Ragnarok. Ragnarok has a very simple effect. Ragnarok's pen effect is whenever you special summon a monster, you can pay 1,000 to special summon any DD monster from your graveyard at the cost of paying 1,000, and any damage you inflict to your opponent is halved. Prices you are very willing to pay for a very free extender, and at a level 5, he can even help you pendulum summon out even your level 4s. His level is great for the lower level pendulum summons, and you can never ever cut this card from the deck. He is everything. On top of that, his field effect is not even that bad too. When he's summoned, he gets to do the same thing. Summon a dude back, but at no half damage, at no burn. And on top of that, he can just tribute a DD monster to get spot removal. Like, what? And he's a level 8. So his level is very good for this deck. He's broken. Most decks wish they can have a card as good as him. Doom King Armageddon. The face of this deck. The biggest beater's at 300 and has a very specific destruction protection effect where you can be protected by the stray dark hole that one friend you have is insistent on running 3 copies of at all times. His pen effect, he gives some attack points. His other main monster effect is he gives more attack points on one of your monsters being destroyed, which this deck doesn't readily do. And with a scale 4, I gave a lot of lenience to other scale 4s, but you play him if you like him. You play him if you're running a rank 8 variant. He's not unusable, but he's not good. He doesn't really provide a whole lot. So I talked up Super Side Zero King Maxwell a lot on his piercing aspects, but there's some monster that should be regarded even higher than him, and that being DDD Zero King Laplace. Zero King Laplace is a battle trick in and of itself. He's a scale 1, so his scale is very good, and his pen effect rivals a card we'll get to in DD Thomas, where you can recycle monsters from your extra deck to your hand, with the only downside it has to be DDD monsters. But when he's played, he can attack anything, get double the attack of that monster, and then sequentially pierce that monster. And if that wasn't enough, he has battle protection. Any battle damage you take from him is nulled, and once per turn he's not destroyed by battle. He's a fantastic battle trick, and he's not even that hard to summon at level 10. All you have to do is tribute one DDD monster, and this guy pops right onto the field ready to take down even your largest threats. Run him if you like him. He can really out some nasty monsters and kill your opponent in really nice situations. And he's not all that hard to summon. On to my favorite card of this deck, Go, DDD, Zero King, Zero God, Ragey. Or in the TCG, we call him Zero King Rage. God, I really hate how they cut Ragey from his name. What makes him so important is the fact that he's a scale 0, which allows us to pendulum summon the man coming out next. On top of that, his monster effect is effectively a finisher if you're at 4,000 or less life points, as he can just match that life points and drop you straight to 0. And if that wasn't good enough, his pen effect allows him to get normal summons of any DDD monster, regardless of how big they are. On top of that, he also mitigates 1 instance of burn damage. This card does everything, and for that, he definitely goes in a strong staple 1-of in this deck. You always run him. A card that allows you to normal summon your entire deck, a card that allows you to pendulum summon the vast majority of your cards, and a card that even mitigates a little bit of damage on the side and can act as a finisher in a pinch. There's no way you can go wrong with having Zero King, Zero God, Ragey. The DD Savants are a sub-archetype that are primarily intended to be your pendulum scales, but a lot of them often have very good on-field effects. Most of them, at least. So the first one we have DD Savant Kepler. You're probably very familiar with this card because it's the most prevalent DD Savant in the entire deck, as he searches your dark contracts. And your dark contracts are how we get anything moving. He also has another effect on summon where you can return a DD card on your field to the hand. You can resolve a couple issues with that, but usually it's the search of a dark contract that you want. And he is a very decent scale 10. Though, note him and Galilei have the distinct problem that every turn they drop their scales by 2. Either up or down, depending on which one you have. And that is a real royal pain in the ass for this deck. So, he's a good scale in a pinch, but you don't even need to if you don't want to. And now that you can pendulum summon out, you have repeated plays for next turn. Searchers go into really strong staples, but you run this, and you're never upset to have him in your hand. I promise you. Here we have the newest rising star in the DDD archetype, DD Savant Copernicus. Copernicus has a very simple effect in that it foolishes a monster from your deck to your graveyard, which is very distinctly prevalent because of our new boy, DD Griffin. Being able to foolish DD Griffin is the single reason why he's been getting so much popularity as of late. On top of his amazing effect, he's also level 4, which lends himself into really good Xyz summons, which is generally how this deck's going to be moving soon, once a new king takes the throne. So, for that, I think at one point he was okay and not upset to have, but now he's pretty easily moved himself up to a really strong staple card. We'll put him next to Kepler. DD Galilei. This card fucking depresses me. It increases its scales every turn as opposed to Kepler who drops his scales, and he has effect in hand to discard himself to return any DD or Dark Contract card on your field to the hand. No circumstance will you ever want to do that. And he's so high level you won't ever be summoning him anyway. He's useless. We have better scale ones, we have better higher level monsters, we have better discard effects. He goes straight in the trash. Pandora is arguably more useful than him. A quintessential scale 10 for this deck. And Savant Newton. Newton has a pendulum effect where he can ignore a little bit of burn damage on a spell which is intended for your dark contracts, but his primary place he shines is him being a scale 10 and having an effect to discard himself and recur a DD or dark contract from your graveyard, which is far, far more useful than Galilei could ever hope to be. And for this, you definitely run him if you like him. I personally run him in my lists. He can go above low place as he's very, very useful. onto another Savant that's less than desirable. DD Savant Nicola. He is not great. Scale 8 is not a particularly great scale for this deck. And his pen effect is just to discard a card and boost a monster's attack by 2,000, which is a fair amount, but not at the loss of hand advantage or getting a terrible scale. But is his monster effect any better? No, it's mainly used to recur your pendulum scales once him and another monster in your pendulum scale gets twin twistered, and that's just about it. Other than that, he's useless. Don't play him. He's fired. But he doesn't deserve to be this far down. His protection effect can probably warrant him being a little higher than DD Ogre. Then we get on to another good DD Savant, the last of the bunch. DD Savant Thomas. DD Savant Thomas is a very important piece to the rank 8 centric DDD lists, as he has a similar pendulum effect to recur resources from your extra deck, which it can be any DD monster, not just DDD monsters. On top of that, he has the added bonus of him being on the field, able to pop one of your pen scales to summon out a level 8 from your deck, which is very, very useful for obviously rank 8 plays, such as the card we'll get into later, Duo Dawn King Caliuga. He's not a mandatory card in most lists, but you are 100% not upset to have him in any sort of way. He's quite fantastic at what he does. On to the extra deck. DDDs are comprised of every single summoning method under the sun except for ritual monsters, and it really goes to show with their wide variety and levels and requirements of their extra deck monsters. First, we'll start with the primary summoning method of this deck, the fusions, the starters. And what better starter than Flame King Genghis. Fun note, Flame King Genghis, Wave King Caesar, and Gust King Alexander are the only non-dark monsters in this entire deck, aside from their High King variants. Flame King Genghis is fantastic as he only requires 2 DD monsters to be fusion summoned, which makes him very, very good as a target for Swirl Slime. DD monsters tend to have the effect of when a monster is special summoned, you can special summon another monster from your graveyard. So Swirl Slime acts as an even freer extender after that. So his level being level 6 is actually quite useful for Synchro 10s with Orthros, or potentially even getting 2 of these guys on the field to go into another great card on this list, Wave King High Caesar. You 100% run this card. He's a very good staple, generally a 2-of in pretty much every single DDD list. Then we have one of the more dated on this list, Oracle King Dark. Oracle King Dark is a level 7, so her level is not great, but she has the amazing effect of whenever you take effect damage, you gain that much instead, which is another reason why we don't see Rebel King Leonidas. She's often summoned because we do end up taking a lot of burn damage over the subsequent turns. Most combos will take 1,000 here from Ragnarok, 1,000 here from Gilgamesh, and we might even take more later on the following turn from our Dark Contracts. Or at the end of the turn, if you run the card Where Art Thou, which is a fantastic inclusion in this deck. Purely because she mitigates so much damage, she's actually quite useful, but I wouldn't say you have to have her if you really didn't like her. Run a copy if you're uncomfortable with how much burn damage you might be taking. Next we have Flame King High Genghis, aka Big Genghis. Big Genghis has the same special summon from graveyard effect that Genghis has, on top of the fact that he requires a DDD monster in addition to a DD monster. But you get the added benefit of having a really useful negation effect, as once per your turn, you can negate a spell or a trap card. This guy allows you to more safely go through your plays without too much interruption, or can be used as a nice prep for a battle trick that your opponent might have during the battle phase. And for that, he's actually a staple. You run him permission every single list just due to how solid he is as an extender, as a level 8 body, and as a slightly good protection effect. Now we're getting to cards that actually have shown their age in Dragon Bane King Beowulf. Beowulf requires one DD monster and one DDD monster, and for that you get a monster that grants all your other monsters piercing, with the additional effect that during your next standby phase you have the option to nuke the entirety of the spell and traps on the board, saving you from some burn damage, ruining a control player's day. These are really not a bad effects to have, but generally you want to run your better extenders like Flame King or most other cards rather than playing Dragonbane, and the extracts were just way too tight to be working with a Piercer like this. You want a Piercer, Zero King Maxwell is your guy. Dragonbane could be a decent tech against control decks. A dated tech, but a tech nonetheless. Wave Oblivion King Caesar Ragnarok. God, I love these names. While there are a couple of cards in this list that outrank him in terms of attack stat, it's his ability to get even larger than that serves as his biggest function. When he attacks a monster, he effectively can snatch one of your opponent's monsters and put him under himself to get all of their attack points as an equip spell. And that allows him to non-target, non-destruction, remove pretty much anything off the board for simple battle trick. You do have to like destroy one of your DD or Dark Contract cards in order to use that effect, but that's a price you are willing to pay for a beat stick as large as him. But that's kind of just what he is, a beat stick. You can, you definitely run him by choice, not by requirement. Dragonbane 2. Right there. Here we have the first of the Armageddon upgrades. The Fusion Armageddon, Purpley Armageddon. You don't see Purpley Armageddon run in most lists, but he has a very nice effect to pop a monster opponent controls and burn them for their entire life savings. He has the same summoning requirements as our big purpley friend here, but he's usually the better card. It's debatable whether or not he's better or worse. He has a couple effects that are mainly battle tricks. He has a pop that leads into some burn. He can make your opponent's monster use their original attack, and his pen effect gives a minor stat buff. I am personally a fan of him mainly because he's fucking super cool and good spot removal, and the burn damage actually comes up, but you run him as you see fit. I'm gonna put him above our purpley friend here because it's my list, fuck you. Next is the Synchros. Oftentimes in the more competitive variants of this deck, you'll see a lot of Synchros be used because this deck particularly has a really good time Synchro summoning a lot of monsters really fast due to recycling of cards like Lamia. And the first one you usually go into using a Lamia and a Genghis is Gust King Alexander. Gust King Alexander doesn't have really a notable effect other than he can special summon a level 4 or lower DD monster from your graveyard, which is just another extender for another Lamia, which leads into our next man's Siegfried over here. So for that, you run him, you're not upset to have him, but he doesn't serve a big role other than being a ladder into a further play. But that ladder into a further play is Siegfried. Siegfried is your primary form of disruption, as he effectively has a Hot Red Dragon Archfiend effect where he can negate spells and traps by just targeting them and blanket negating them. He even has another effect where you can gain back some life points equal to your Dark Contracts, which can come up, but he's primarily used for that disruption. As a level 8, he is not hard to make, and you definitely don't leave the home without him. One you do definitely leave home without is Gust King High Alexander. His entire MO is that he can become a really big 6,000 beater if you have 3 DDD monsters in the field, which is not actually that hard to achieve. And he has the same version effect that Genghis and Big Genghis do, but that generally doesn't make him any better because by the time you make it to him, you're probably starting to run out of gas. All for the effect you got a really big beater. Run him in beatdown lists, don't run him in much more. On to the next Armageddon upgrade, we have Bright Armageddon. Bright Armageddon has a couple effects, most of which are anti-pendulum effects, which almost never come up. But what does come up is that he's a 3500 boy that gives all of your monsters targeting protection. And when all of your monsters are 2500 attack or above, having targeting protection is really fucking annoying. Most people don't like to run him. I love to run him. That targeting protection is really, really nasty. So he can sit a very comfortable spot up here as a tech choice. Then we have a very miserable excuse for an Xyz monster in Stone King Darius. He has a couple of battle tricks leading to a little bit of burn damage, but ultimately it doesn't matter because it's a rank 3, and that's a very, very awkward rank for this deck, as we don't even have a lot of level 3s that we even care about playing in the first place. His effect's just not good enough to warrant forcing him out. He's bad. He's bad. He's fired. Is he unplayable? No. So he goes higher on this list, but he's still not good. He's really bad. Then we have the third and final king in Wave King. Wave King has gotten a really recent glow these past few months. While his effect of resurrecting anything that's destroyed at the end of the battle phase is not great, he is a very perfect ladder into our boy that we'll get into later. So you definitely have to run him. You're not that upset to have him. His protection effect's not all that terrible, and he's a ladder into your better plays later on down the line. So you're not upset to have him purely because he's got to be there, and he's one of your best options for rank 4. Then we get an actually crazy card in Wave King High Caesar. Wave King High Caesar basically has Solemn Warning that it can activate twice, with an added bonus that you can give one of your monsters 1800 attack on each. That's just kind of gross. His biggest problem is that he's a rank 6, which is not unfeasible with a combination of Genghis and Berfomet. He's not particularly easy to summon, but he's definitely worth the effort in summoning. So I'm gonna put him in like the top of okay, not upset to have. If you can facilitate running him, you definitely should. He's kind of crazy. Then we have a miserable excuse for a card, Marksman King Tell. He has an effect that counters the opponent when they do burn damage, and that's pretty much all he does. He can also special summon himself by placing him on top of Wave King, but why would you do that when you have a literal better card to do that with coming on in the next spot? He's fucking terrible. He's practically unusable. His only excuse is he's not that hard to summon. Here we have the new king to the throne, Amnesty King Doom Machina. The card that's going to push this deck into a relevant status. This card has the very, very nasty ability of once per chain. Per chain. You can detach 2 materials or destroy one of your contracts on the field to suck one of your opponent's monsters that activate their effects on the field under him as material. Every single time they activate a monster effect on the field, you can just suck them as material. You can get this man up to 6 activations a turn with basic setups. And he's really easy to summon, as you can place him right on top of any DDD monster, any of them, not just the Xyz monsters, but he gains the materials of the Xyz monster summoned under him, so Wave King is generally your best target to place him over. And for that, he's going to put a lot of work in making this deck like any amount of competitive. He is crazy. I haven't even said the other effects where he can place himself in the scales and then freely special summon out the other scale. He puts himself into the scale during the standby phase without even having to be destroyed. And he's a scale 10. One of the best scales to have in this deck. This man is no joke. He is amazing. On to other amazing cards. Duo Dawn King Kaliyuga, usually responsible for degenerate shenanigans requiring the Phantom Knight's Rinkum Magic launch, but other than that, Kaliyuga is the other primary rank 8, as he's a very, very big body that negates everything else but him on the field when he comes out, and can basically just Harpy's Feather Duster your opponent during their turn. That's actually insane. And for as insane as it is, it's not always the most practical thing to use, so he probably earns strong over being busted. He definitely deserves strong rather than stable, as his effects are not very good for every single matchup that you go into. but he's never a bad option to have to go into. Plus, you can perform some very nasty shenanigans with Wonder Exceeds. Then we have the last of the Armageddon upgrades, that being Dark Armageddon. Dark Armageddon is the other pairing with Bright Armageddon as it protects your monsters from being destroyed, and he has a very relevant effect to just pop cards on the field equal to your Pendulum monsters, which is, for a lot of methods, not bad. Mass removal on top of a destruction protection is definitely enough to make him playable. It might actually put him into not upset to have territory, as he's not that hard to make with 2 level 8s. Here we have the heart and soul of what makes this a Pendulum deck. Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a link 2 that can freely place both your scales, so long as you don't have any scales, at the cost of just taking 1,000 points of burn damage. He even has the added effect if he's destroyed on the field and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon any of your DDD monsters from your extra deck. Even the fusions, synchros, everything else. Anything that's a DDD in your extra deck, he can summon him. Just on being destroyed. What else would you call this man? He's a staple. You run him 1 or 2 of them in every list. He gets you your scales. He gets you free arrows for your pen summons. He gives you a little bit of burn damage if you want to use the burn damage extenders. He even has a slight bit of recursion. What's not to love? Onto the spell and trap support for this deck. The spell and trap support comes in the form of some generic support cards, and most being Dark Contracts. Dark Contracts are continuous spells and traps that stay on the field and burn you during your standby phase every turn you have them. Powerful cards, but at a price, often which can be mitigated. Kicking things off is the best Dark Contract you always want in your opening hand. Dark Contract with a Gate. What does Dark Contract with a Gate do? It searches. Where do searchers go? Staples. You run 3 of this card, you don't leave the home without this card. This card does everything. It's a once per turn, which keeps it out of busted territory, but you always run this and you always want to see it. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Dark Contract with the Yami Makai. All it does is allow you to fix up your pendulum scales by placing scales from your extra deck or your graveyard onto your field, and that's it. It's not worth running a spot. It's not worth even looking at. You really don't have a hard time getting your scales anyway after Gilgamesh's existence. Don't even consider it. It's not worth it. But something that definitely is worth it is your alternate method to fusion summon. Not a fusion spell, but Dark Contract with the Swamp King. It does what you'd expect a fusion spell to do. It fusion summons from your hand or your field, as it should, once per turn, but at the added benefit that you can also banish monsters from your graveyard if you're summoning a DDD monster. And that added amount of flexibility of being able to fuse from anywhere, setting up your graveyard, using your banished as a resource, really puts it into staple status. It is so good, and you like to have it in your opening hand, you just don't want to brick on it. Then you have Forbidden Dark Contract with the Swamp King, and the reason why it's forbidden is because nobody plays it and you should never run it. People will really look at you differently if you do. All it does is allow you to special summon a DDD monster from your hand, and then allows you to fusion summon, but you have to use the DDD monster that you special summoned. Why would they make a Dark Contract? Intending to upgrade on another Dark Contract, only to make it completely worse. It is strictly worse by most metrics. Its only advantage is that you can special summon a DDD monster from your hand, which this deck does not have any trouble doing in the first place. So it's relevant only in the trash. Did you know they gave this deck a field spell with the other new cards in this list, like Griffin and Amnesty King, and that field spell, being patented Dark Contract documents, does not have the same burn damage effect, but instead has a really nice restriction, lock on your opponent, and burns your opponent. If your opponent would special summon a fusion, synchro, exceeds, or link, if you had the same corresponding type on your field, your opponent takes 1,000 burn damage and they cannot commit to that summoning type again. This can be particularly nasty against some decks that need to rapidly link summon, rapidly synchro summon, or continuously exceed summon. The 1000 burn damage for each lockout is just an added bonus. This card is definitely going to be a pain in the ass for those who decide to play this deck once this all gets fully released. Patented Dark Contract Documents is a card that you need to be wary of when facing against this deck. It is a really nasty sort of floodgate. For that, I definitely think it deserves to be in the busted category. Now we have the Trap Dark Contracts, where they get a little less good, and this being Dark Contract with Eternal Darkness. All this does is your DD monsters have a bit of protection from being used for your opponent's stuff, fusion, synchro XCs, or otherwise, and a little bit of protection from tributing and destruction or targeting. It's literally just a big protection effect, and it's not that great in that respect. I suppose it could be the bottom of a tech choice because against certain matchups it could be relevant, particularly against Super Poly, but people could just chain Super Poly to this card and it wouldn't do a whole lot. Either way, like, it's not bad protection, it's just not anything you really need. Run it if you feel like the format can use it well. Then we get to an actual good card, Dark Contract with Errors. This is effectively like an in-archetype Royal Decree, which means it's just searchable Royal Decree, as once per turn you can just blanket negate trap cards on the field. This is actually very useful against control matchups. So for that, it actually goes into a higher spot as a tech choice. Really nice, a really nice card for your sideboard. Right there. Another playable card that we have is Dark Contract with the Witch. It's essentially just in archetype Raigeki Break that gives your monsters a 1000 attack stat during your opponent's turn. A little bit of battle trick, a little bit of spot removal. It's not a card you see in lists very often, but you definitely have to respect its existence. Quick spot removal at the cost of a discard is never that bad, and for that I think it goes up into okay, not upset to have territory. The rest of the trap support are not contracts. These cards are normal or continuous traps with the purpose of recurring advantage and disrupting your opponent. First, DD Human Resources. The most interesting card of the bunch, as you can shuffle 3 of your DD cards from a grave, hand, or field into the deck to add 2 DD monsters from your deck to your hand, which is not terrible. It just has that caveat of being a trap card, but it is very playable. Run 1 if you like it. DD Reroll is just protection for your Dark Contracts, and recycles your Banished, which is much less good. It's a continuous trap, so it has a tougher time getting into the graveyard than it should. And the protection on your Dark Contracts is not very great because you really don't care if your opponent removes them. And for that, it's kind of just straight bad, not unplayable, but definitely straight bad. DD Recruit simply allows you to get cards back from your graveyard if your opponent has more monsters than you do, up to the difference of your own monsters. It's not unplayable, but it's not very good. Bottom of tech choice. DD Contract Change, as the name would mislead you to, it doesn't actually change your Dark Contracts, but instead is a little bit of a battle trick. It drops your opponent's attack equal to the amount of the monster banished for this card's effect, which is an okay battle trick. Or you can add a level 4 or lower DD Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand. On an attack declaration, it's not great, but if your format's slow enough, maybe it's considerable. And the battle trick is not terrible. DD Headhunt. DD Headhunt is another card coming with a new batch of cards, except it's just Crackdown, but bad. Its primary difference is that it turns the monster cracked down into a DDD, so you can put Amnesty King on top of him, but that's bad. You shouldn't do that. Don't do that. Run Crackdown. It's going to go on the top of that because it's going to go to the top of your fired purely because there's just a better version of this card out there that you can run. Lastly, we have not even a DD card, Contract Laundering, which is essentially like a emergency provisions for the archetype. You can destroy some of your Dark Contracts, draw cards equal to the amount destroyed, and then gain 1,005 points for each. You don't need this card to do that. It's not that bad, but it's not that good. Don't really need to bother with it. This is my own personal list of DVDs, so let me run you through the breakdown. Recap where to get us our dark contracts, Lamia to extend in our synchros, Necroslime for further fusion summoning, Ghost, a single copy of Ghost to put an extra Swirl Slime or Necroslime in the grave, and for a little bit of recycling. Then we got 3 Copernicus. I was running this at 1 before Griffin came out, but now the Griffin's out. 3 is pretty much the way to go. 1 Griffin, 3 Swirl Slime to get your plays started, Ragnarok because he's another extender, 2 copies of Baphomet for Xyz plays, and a Lilith for recycling. Newton because he also is a recycling, and he's also a high scale if I feel like I need a high scale. Then we have Zero King of Place, a single copy, the battle trick of the deck, and a copy of Zero King Rage as a low scale. 3 Dark Contract with a Gate, a Swamp King, a patented Dark Contract documents, 3 Allure. 3 Wear Off Thou. This card is particularly useful because a lot of your best cards are level 1, being Kepler, Lamia, and Necroslime, and this can pull either one of those on any one of them being on the field. And the burn damage can turn into a hefty heal with Oracle King Dark. A Monster Reborn for just general recursion. 1 for 1 because your best cards are level 1 again, and Upstart for a little bit of added consistency. I have these 2, I have Eulogy King and Chaos King in the side because Chaos King's a card that I reasonably should play more of, but I simply don't. And Eulogy King, I have done no testing with him, so I have not put him in the list yet. And for the extras, we have a synchro package of Gust King, Siegfried, and Bright. Xyz, we have Wave King, Amnesty King, Wave High King, Dark Armageddon, Kali Yuga. We have the lone copy of Gilgamesh, 2 small Genghis, 1 big Genghis, Oracle King, Wave Oblivion King, and Purple Armageddon. I know I probably shouldn't be running both of these together, but fuck you, it's my list. Now let's clean up this list. I noticed after fixing this list up, I missed Dark Contract with the entities, so I would probably just put it right ahead of Dark Contract with Eternal Darkness. It has a variety of effects that go off whenever you summon a monster of a specific type, except for Link because Links weren't out at the time of the card's creation. Most of which are not amazing, but they're definitely playable, and as a continuous spell, it's still very usable. So run one if you like it right ahead of Eternal Darkness. Other than that, that wraps up this tier list. If you like these kinds of tier lists, I have a couple others on this channel, and if you dig them, feel free to subscribe or leave a comment if you know any way I can improve these. And I have a Twitch that I stream on ever so infrequently, and a Twitter that I mostly just post pictures of my puppy on. I really gotta use Twitter more. Other than that, I'll see you later. That report is still due on Tuesday, otherwise you're fired.